listening?
My father now insists it was spawned from hell. It was Cujo. My mom will whisper to me it was just Toto, Corey. It was really a small thing. And so there I was, 1970. Baby growing up in this town, my father and my mother, my brother and me, as my father referred to us, 4 raisins in a tub of vanilla ice cream. And in this amazing town, in this nurturing community, I grew strong and had my share of success. As a high school All-American football player, I was in the Honor Society, president of my class, but if my parents saw me getting too big for my britches, if they saw me looking proud, my father would be right there. He would say to me, boy, don't you dare walk around this house like you hit a triple when you were born on third base. He would say to me, you need to understand something. You drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you did not dig. You eat lavishly from banquet tables prepared for you by your ancestors. You sit under the shade of trees that you did not plant or cultivate or care for. You have a choice in life. You could just sit back, getting fat, dumb, and happy, consuming all of the blessings put before you, or it could metabolize inside of you, become fuel to get you into the fight, to make this democracy real, to make it true to its words, that we can be a nation of liberty and justice for all. And so, in answer to my father's call, when I had exhausted most of the degrees available to any bright student, I moved to Newark, New Jersey. And I tell you, it was not some great altruism. I was looking to be the man that my father raised me to be. I was in search of myself, and I found a community of heroes that embraced me and brought me back full circle to family. When I first arrived in Newark, I decided to answer that call from that great American philosopher, Chris Rock, who said, why is it the most violent street in every city is named for the man that stood for nonviolence? Newark had so many strong neighborhoods, but I sought out one that was in struggle and found it on Martin Luther King Boulevard. It looked spectacularly troublesome to me. My eyes saw abandoned homes being used for drugs. My eyes saw violence. My eyes saw graffiti. But the first person I met, the tenant leader in the high-rise projects that I would eventually move into, Miss Jones, she said to me, tell me again what you see. Describe what you see around you. And I described what I saw. And she looks at me and she says, boy, if that's all you see, you could never help me. And I go, what do you mean? And she goes, you need to understand something. That the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you see only problems and darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, opportunity, possibility, love, even the face of God, then you can help me make a change. And I remember after she said that, looking at her, scratching my head and thinking to myself, okay, Grasshopper, that's ended the lesson. I worked with this woman, this tenant leader, and I would sit at her kitchen table and watch these other African-American women sit around that table in these projects being run by a slumlord, and they would sit there and strategize about how to take care of the kids in the community, how to keep a family in their housing when they missed a rental payment. I stood there and I watched them thinking about how to support that community, and I found it. I found conspirators. I found people coming together, and they weren't just in those projects all over Newark. I saw more and more people who had a courage, who had a spirit, who had a love. And so for my father's sake, I want to explain to you the 3 things that these conspirators all had in common. One was they embraced discomfort. They did not seek comfort and convenience. They went to where the challenges were. Here were people around me in Newark doing extraordinary things outside of their comfort zone. Like the man who was a retired state worker that got his stimulus check in the mail, and instead of just spending it on himself, he went out and got a lawnmower, marched into one of our troubled drug lots. There was this big grassy overgrown field with trash and debris. He started cleaning it. He made it look like the White House lawn, never confronting a drug dealer, but eventually they left. Like the woman who came to me in my office hours, an 80-year-old woman complaining to me about how dirty her street was, and the next day I go out there, and here's this 80-year-old woman outside of her comfort zone, on that street, sweeping the entire block, showing that he who has a heart to help definitely does have a right to complain. It's about the guy I know who was driving to work in Newark and didn't like the graffiti. And instead of just driving by it and accepting what was, like so many of us who just fall into a state of sedentary agitation, when we're upset about what's going on, but we don't get up and do something about it. He stopped at a store and began making a routine out of his commute to work where he would stop and take paint and paint over graffiti. In my city, I see that conspirators know you do not go through life comfortable. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It is a difficult, hard, challenging, full contact, competitive, participatory endeavor. And this is critical. People who get comfortable of body get fat. People who get comfortable of mind and intellect get dull. People who get comfortable in their spirit, they miss what they were created for. They were created to magnify the glory of the world, not simply reduce in size and fail to reflect that spirit. I've come to learn in my life to embrace discomfort because it's a precondition to service. I've come to realize to embrace fears because if you can move through fear, you find out that fear is a precondition to discovery. I've learned in my life to embrace frustration because when you get really frustrated, that is a precondition to incredible breakthroughs. Now, the second thing I've seen amongst conspirators is this idea of faithfulness. Mother Teresa was once asked how she judged success. And she said, God didn't call me to be successful, he called me to be faithful. I didn't need to read Mother Teresa, I just simply needed to look at people in my community in Newark. Miss Virginia Jones, that tenant leader, was once telling me a story when I was peppering her with questions about her life. I had lived with her now in those buildings for years, and I never knew that she had a son. She told me about one day somebody knocked on her door. She opened her door, and there was this woman crying who could not speak. She dragged her down to the lobby, and there on the lobby floor was her son, a veteran, who had come back to visit her. There he was on the lobby floor with 3 gunshots, bleeding that lobby floor red. She sat there and she was telling me the story that she fell to her knees, crying in her dead son's chest. And when she finished telling me the story, I looked at her and I said, Miss Jones, I'm sorry, but why do you still live in these buildings where your son was murdered, walking through that lobby every day? And she looked at me almost like she was insulted by the question, but I knew that she and I were 2 people that paid market rent to live in this housing. She had choices of where to go, and she looks at me and she says, why do I still live here? And I said, yes. She goes, why do I live in apartment 5A still? And I said, yes. She goes, why am I still the tenant president for over 40 years? And I said, that's electoral longevity. I want you to tell me about that. But yes, why? And she crossed her arms looking at me and she said, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. Here is a woman that remained faithful. And I want to tell you, graduates, of all the lessons of conspirators, this is the hardest one for me personally. To stay faithful in a world that can be so cruel. To stay faithful in a world that justifiably emotes cynicism. I have seen things in my life that have broken me in spirit. have ground me down to the floor. In 2004, in April, I was walking through one of the neighborhoods of my city and I heard gunshots going off. It sounded like cannon fire between the buildings. I raced towards where the gunshots were fired and I saw kids screaming and yelling. I saw one boy falling backwards off of some steps. I went to catch him and I caught him and I looked over his shoulder and I saw the white t-shirt he was wearing filling up with red blood. I laid him down and put my hand on his chest trying to stop the bleeding, but the blood was coming everywhere. I screamed at someone to tell me his name and they did.